The stale scent of cheap whiskey clung to my shirt like a second skin, a grim perfume for a man who traded his badge for a bar stool. Rain slicked the grimy windows of my usual haunt, each drop a tiny hammer blow against the glass, echoing the persistent thrum in my temples. Years had bled into a monotonous blur since the city had chewed me up and spat me out, leaving me with nothing but ghosts and a gnawing regret that settled deep in my bones. A gruff voice, thick with a smoker's rasp, broke through the low murmur of the bar. "Cole, I still breathing." I grunted, not bothering to turn. The bartender, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with weary resignation, slid a fresh glass of amber liquid across the worn counter. It was my usual. He knew, they all knew. The fallen hero, the man who'd let the Serpent slip through his fingers. "Barely," I admitted, my voice a low rumble. "What's the news from the gutters?" He leaned in, his eyes darting around the mostly empty room. "Heard some chatter. Something big went down tonight, real clean, like a whisper." My hand halfway to the glass stilled. "Clean how?" I asked, the weariness momentarily forgotten, a flicker of something sharp, something dangerous igniting within me. No witnesses, no alarms tripped, just gone, vanished. They're saying it was the old Sterling warehouse down by the docks. The Sterling warehouse, my gut tightened. It was too close, too damn close. The Serpent's first kill years ago had been in a place just like that, a forgotten industrial husk, smelling of decay and desperation. "Who's they?" I pressed, trying to keep my tone casual, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. "The usual suspects," the bartender shrugged, wiping down the counter with a practiced, indifferent motion. "Underworld rumors, but this one's got a style to it. The way they got in, the way they got out. Like a ghost. A ghost. That word landed like a physical blow. The Serpent was a ghost. A phantom who danced through the city's underbelly, leaving a trail of carefully orchestrated chaos and fear. And I had been the one to chase that phantom, to feel its icy breath on my neck, only to watch it disappear into the night, leaving me with nothing but a file full of dead ends and a career in tatters. I pushed the drink away, the ice clinking a mournful tune. The rain outside had intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the world. I needed air. I needed to feel something real, something that wasn't the suffocating weight of my own failures. "Thanks for the heads up," I said, dropping a few crumpled bills onto the counter. They were more than the drink was worth, a silent offering to a man who'd seen too much. Stepping out into the deluge, the cold rain was a shark, a welcome sting against my skin. It washed away some of the stale bar smell, but it couldn't cleanse the memories that clung to me, the Sterling warehouse. It felt like a cruel joke, a twisted echo from a past I couldn't outrun. I hailed a cab, the driver's bored expression a mirror of my own internal landscape. "Darks," I grunted, sinking into the cracked vinyl seat. The Serpent's signature was meticulous planning, an almost artistic precision in their execution. They didn't just steal, they dismantled. The cab pulled to a stop a few blocks from the warehouse. The driver grumbled about the restricted access, but a generous wad of cash smoothed his objections. I stepped out into the driving rain, pulling the collar of my worn leather jacket up. The Sterling warehouse loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette against the bruised purple sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the storm. Police cruisers, their lights a silent, pulsing pulse in the downpour, were already scattered around the perimeter. Uniformed officers, their faces grim, moved with a practiced efficiency, their radios crackling with clipped, urgent voices. I observed the scene, my detective's instinct, dormant but not dead, stirring. The way the officers were positioned, the methodical sweep of their flashlights, it all spoke of a professional operation. No forced entry obvious from my vantage point, no signs of a struggle, just emptiness. Then I saw him. The way he gestured, the confident set of his shoulders, something about him pricked at my awareness. He was too calm, too in control for a mere observer. He moved with an authority that wasn't official. My breath hitched. It was the same stillness, the same almost imperceptible arrogance I'd seen in the eyes of the man who'd briefed the police on the Serpent's first crime. A consultant, they'd called him then. A man with an uncanny knack for understanding the criminal mind. I watched as the suited man finished his conversation and turned to leave, his gaze sweeping across the periphery. As he walked away, I saw him reach into his inner pocket. He pulled out a slim, leather-bound notebook, flipping through its pages under the faint glow of a distant street lamp. The deliberate, almost elegant way he handled it sent a jolt of recognition through me. Then, my eyes fell on a discarded piece of paper, caught on a rusty chain-link fence near where I stood. It was a shipping manifest, smudged by the rain but still legible. Sterling Imports, it read. Contents: high-end electronics, specialized scientific equipment, and precision tools. Precision tools. The Serpent's hallmark. Tools so fine, so expertly crafted, they could dismantle a safe without leaving a scratch. The same kind of tools that had been listed as missing from the Sterling warehouse inventory. And then, a glint of metal caught my eye. Just beyond the fence, half hidden in a puddle, lay a small, intricately engraved silver cufflink. Not from fear, but from a sickening certainty. This wasn't just a coincidence. This was a message, a taunt. The Serpent was back, and I was the only one who knew. I pulled out my phone, the screen a bright rectangle in the gloom. I needed to get out of here, to think. The rain plastered my hair to my forehead as I scanned the horizon. It was a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. I'd seen it on a map once, a discreet escape route for the wealthy and the desperate. The Serpent wasn't just back. They were leaving, and they were leaving a calling card. My hand clenched around the phone. The ghosts of the past were no longer content to haunt my dreams. They were walking the earth again. And this time I wouldn't let them slip away. I had to stop them, for me. I started walking, my boots crunching on the wet gravel, the rain a relentless drumbeat against my resolve. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running. That's where I was going. Because that's where the Serpent would be. And I was going to meet them. The air in the car tasted of stale cigarette smoke and the metallic tang of rain. Each swish of the wipers against the windshield was a metronome, ticking away the seconds I'd sworn I'd left behind. The detective's words, a low rumble from the passenger seat, were barely audible over the engine's growl. "I'm sure about this, Cole. This isn't my jurisdiction anymore." I gripped the steering wheel, grip tight. They're using the Serpent's playbook. No one else sees it. No one else wants to see it. My gaze swept over the darkened warehouses that lined the industrial district, ghosts of a past life I couldn't outrun. The Serpent. The name itself still coiled in my gut, a cold knot of regret. We were headed for the edge of town, a place where the city's glow faded into a bruised, ink-eye blackness. The detective, a man whose face was a roadmap of late nights and bad coffee, had grudgingly agreed to a detour, a tip he'd called it. The Serpent was always about finesse, Cole. The detective continued, his voice laced with skepticism. These jobs are cruder, smash and grab mostly. The methodology is the same. The thinking is the same. I countered, the words catching in my throat. I saw it in the way the evidence was handled, the calculated timing, the almost arrogant defiance of the authorities. It was a ghost of a ghost, but I knew it. Then the landscape shifted. The usual sprawl of urban decay gave way to a starker, more desolate terrain. The detective pointed a gloved finger ahead. There, that's the place. It was a private airstrip, no lights, engine running. The description hung in the air, a stark contradiction. No lights, but an engine running. That was the Serpent's way, the illusion of simplicity, masking a complex, hidden truth. Its engines hummed a low, resonant thrum, a predator waiting to take flight. We pulled over on a dusty access road, the car's engine falling silent. The quiet was deafening, broken only by the distant whine of the jet's engines. The detective grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight from the glove compartment. "Stay close." My past was a tapestry woven with threads of brilliance and catastrophic error. We approached the airstrip cautiously, the gravel crunching under our boots. The air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and something else, something acrid like burnt sugar. No other vehicles, no figures milling about, just the hum of the engines and the relentless sweep of the searchlight. "Odd," the detective murmured, his flashlight beam dancing across the empty runway. "Looks like they're ready to go, but no one's here to load or unload." My eyes scanned the perimeter, catching details that the detective's pragmatic gaze might overlook. The faint scuff marks on the tarmac, not from tires, but from something heavy being dragged. A glint of metal near the jet's landing gear. I moved towards it, my instincts screaming a warning. It was a small, intricately carved silver charm, no bigger than my thumbnail. A coiled serpent. My breath hitched. This was no crude imitation. This was the Serpent's calling card, a mark I hadn't seen in years. "What is it?" The detective's voice was tense. I picked it up, turning it over in my fingers. The metal was warm, as if it had recently been held. Or at least his influence. "This is more than just a copycat, detective." He swore under his breath. "But why here? Why now? And where is everyone?" I looked back at the jet, its engines still churning. The searchlight continued its unwavering sweep. Then I noticed it. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air, just beyond the beam of light near the jet's tail. It was the kind of distortion I saw over hot asphalt, but the night was cool and damp. "They're not just flying out," I said, my mind racing. "They're not just leaving with something. They're leaving from something." The detective followed my gaze, his brow furrowed. "What are I saying, Cole?" I didn't answer him. I was already moving, my steps quickening, drawn by an invisible current. The acrid smell was stronger, almost overpowering. I circled the rear of the jet, my flashlight beam fixed on the tarmac, and then I saw it. It wasn't oil, it wasn't fuel, and it smelled wrong, like ozone and something metallic, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. This felt different. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, the screen a blinding white in the gloom. I needed to get this to someone, anyone, but who? The official channels would dismiss it as the ramblings of a washed-up detective. "Cole!" The detective's voice was sharp, a jolt back to reality. "What is that?" I looked at the stain, then at the charm in my hand, then back at the humming jet. The Serpent's signature was meticulous, yes, but it was also about transformation, about leaving the old world behind and emerging anew. It felt like a baptism, a perversion of rebirth. There was I seeing things. There was this just the desperate projection of a broken man onto a crime scene. The Serpent I knew was cunning, but not this alien, unsettling presence. But then my eyes fell on a small, discarded piece of equipment near the stain. A specialized ventilation unit, its hoses still attached. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen in a typical heist. And it was humming, a low, almost imperceptible vibration. This wasn't just a theft. This was something else entirely. A terrifying new chapter, and I was already too deep to turn back. The hum of the engine vibrated through the soles of my worn boots, a low growl against the oppressive silence of the private airstrip. No lights, engine running. The jet's belly was a gaping maw, dark and cavernous, and the stench of aviation fuel, sharp and acrid, clawed at my nostrils. The charm, cool and smooth against my palm, felt like a tiny, damning weight. It was still there, nestled amongst the discarded tools and oily rags, a marking little serpent coiled around a tiny, perfect pearl. He'd left it behind, just like the others. A calling card, a taunt. The jet's engines sputtered, a cough that echoed across the tarmac. Time was a thief, always stealing seconds when I needed them most. The first heist, a jewelry store, clean, precise, almost surgical. The second, a private art gallery, a bolder stroke, a higher risk, and now this, a jet. What was he stealing from a jet on a runway? Not cargo, not passengers, something else. Something that required this level of theatricality, this grand, desperate gesture. My mind churned, a relentless current pulling me back to the Serpent's signature. The meticulous planning, yes, but it was more than that. It was the symbolism, the transformation, the shedding of the old to embrace the new, and the stain, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. I tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for the reassuring heft of the weapon I no longer carried. Years of ingrained habit, a phantom limb of my former life, not one of the Serpent's usual pawns. This one moved with a different kind of purpose, a professional stillness. "Cole!" The voice was a low rumble, devoid of inflection. The stranger. I'd seen him before, a ghost in the periphery of the previous scenes, a silent observer. He never interfered, never spoke, until now. "I'm here for the same reason," I stated, my voice rough. The air crackled with unspoken tension. He took a slow step closer, his eyes, even in the dim light, seemed to bore into me. "He's escalating. This isn't just about acquisition anymore." "What is it about, then?" I challenged, my gaze sweeping over the jet, searching for anything out of place. The cargo doors were sealed tight. No sign of forced entry yet. The stain and the charm. A declaration. He gestured with a subtle nod towards the jet's nose. Look closer. I moved, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The paint on the jet's hull was pristine, a gleaming, expensive finish. But there, near the insignia, a stylized serpent eating its own tail, a small section was subtly different. Not a scratch, not a smudge, a patch, applied with the same precision as the serpent's other work. My breath hitched. It was a symbol, stylized skull, rendered in a stark, minimalist fashion, a mark of death. He's not just stealing, the stranger continued, his voice a low, grave pronouncement. He's leaving his mark, and this time the mark is a promise. A promise of what? My mind reeled. The serpent's original spree had ended with a body count, but that was years ago. The man I'd hunted, the phantom that had haunted my dreams, was supposed to be gone, vanished. But this was his echo. Louder, bolder, more dangerous. Suddenly, the distant hum of the jet's engines intensified, a rising crescendo that vibrated in my chest. Sirens wailed, a mournful cry that ripped through the night. The stranger didn't flinch. They'll find Cole. The lights swept across the tarmac, illuminating the jet, the stain, the tiny coiled serpent charm glinting on the ground. Uniformed figures emerged from the vehicles, weapons drawn, their movements sharp and urgent. Grim-faced detective, his badge glinting, approached me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Cole," he barked, his voice laced with accusation. "What the hell are I doing here?" I looked at him, at the flashing lights, at the jet that now seemed like a tomb. And I, somehow, was already caught in his web. The stakes had just been raised. The serpent wasn't just leaving his mark on stolen goods. He was leaving it on me. The air on the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was thick with the metallic tang of jet fuel and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar. It clung to my tongue, a bitter promise of what was to come. The jet's engines hummed a low, guttural thrum, a beast waiting to be unleashed, its belly a gaping maw. My breath misted in the chilled night, each exhalation a visible ghost of my unease. I'd been pulled from the quiet of my self-imposed exile by a frantic call from a colleague. "Cole," the voice had rasped, laced with a fear I hadn't heard in years. It's happening again. And here I was, standing on the precipice of that dread. The phantom scent of the serpent's past work prickling my skin. The colleague, a grim-faced man with eyes that had seen too much, gestured towards the jet. They hit the transport an hour ago. Clean, no witnesses, no alarms tripped, just gone. He spat the words out as if the very act of speaking them was a physical exertion. Like the others. The others. This wasn't just a random act of larceny. The targets, on the surface, seemed disparate. A secure vault in the city's financial district, a rare manuscript from a private collection, and now this cargo of high-value gemstones. But the precision, the surgical execution, the utter lack of collateral damage that was the serpent's signature. A signature I'd etched into my memory during a long, agonizing investigation that had cost me everything. I walked around the jet, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the crushed gravel. Nothing. The perpetrators were ghosts, leaving behind only the unsettling impression of their passage. My mind, a well-worn instrument of deduction, began to hum, picking out discordant notes in the seemingly random melody of the crimes. "Anything else missing?" I asked, my voice low, a gravelly murmur against the engine's drone. The colleague shook his head. "Just the jewels. The manifest was intact. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were after." Exactly what they were after. That was the key. Greed alone didn't explain this level of meticulous planning, this focus on specific items. There had to be a thread, a commonality that linked these disparate targets, a motive that transcended mere monetary gain. I ran a hand over the cool metal of the jet's fuselage, my fingers tracing an invisible pattern. The jewels, the manuscript, the documents from the financial vault. What did they have in common, beyond their inherent value? My thoughts drifted back to the serpent's previous victims, the ones that had led to my downfall. Each had been a prominent figure, a titan of industry or a collector of rare artifacts. And each, I remembered with a jolt, had a hidden connection to a specific, obscure research project from decades ago. One belonged to a Mr. Sealer's Thorn. Apparently he kept personal papers there. Old ones. Silas Thorne. The name resonated like a struck bell. He was one of the key figures in that defunct research project. The Serpent had a pattern, a historical obsession. This wasn't just about theft. It was about reclaiming something, about rewriting a narrative that had been deliberately erased. And the manuscript, I pressed. A first edition of The Alchemist's Lament. The colleague replied, his voice tinged with a morbid curiosity. Owned by a private collector, a recluse named Elias Vance. He was known for his fascination with ancient texts, particularly those concerning, well, arcane knowledge. Arcane knowledge. Silas Thorne's research project had delved into fringe theories, forgotten histories. The Serpent was piecing together a puzzle, and the stolen items were its scattered fragments. This wasn't a simple heist. It was a statement, a declaration. The Serpent was not only back, but bolder, more ambitious than before. And I, Cole, the disgraced detective who had sworn off this life, was once again its unwilling audience. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, felt less like a crime scene and more like a stage, set for a performance I was compelled to witness. The stale air of the warehouse clung to me, a second skin woven from dust and regret. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, a frantic eye searching for answers in the debris. The Serpent's trail, once a whisper, now felt like a roar, echoing the phantom footsteps of the man I'd never caught. Silas Thorne's name had been a key, unlocking a door I'd tried to brick shut. His research, a descent into the occult, a tapestry of forgotten symbols and whispered legends. The stolen artifacts, fragments of a morbid mosaic, pieces of a puzzle I was forced to reassemble. He'd been cagey, a bird with clipped wings, but the mention of Thorne's name, the subtle shift in his voice, had been enough. He'd given me a location, a place where deals were struck under the indifferent gaze of flickering neon. I found him huddled in a corner, a man made of frayed edges and nervous tics. His eyes darted like trapped mice. "I shouldn't be here, Cole," he rasped, his voice a dry rustle. I said I had something for me. I countered, my own voice a low rumble, careful not to startle him further. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each groan a betrayal of my presence. He shook his head, his thin hair clinging to his scalp. It's too much. This Thorne, he's not playing with marbles. He's building something old." He gestured vaguely with a trembling hand. "The Serpent. It's a metaphor, see, for the cycle, the return. The return of what? My patience, a fragile thing these days, was fraying. The phantom ache in my shoulder, a souvenir from the night everything went wrong, throbbed with a familiar rhythm. The power. The ancient power. Thorne believes he can harness it. The artifacts, they're the conduits." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "He's getting ready for the final ritual. Tonight, he's moving the last piece." "Where?" The word was a raw demand. "That's all I know. But Cole, you need to understand. This isn't just about Thorne, the Serpent. It's been waiting. Allies. This was more than just a twisted academic's obsession. This was a network, a conspiracy woven into the fabric of the city's underbelly." "Who?" I pressed. Not a ghost this time, but something solid, menacing. He moved with a silent efficiency that spoke of training, of purpose. He was not alone. Two more figures, equally anonymous and dangerous, materialized behind him. A phantom limb, a ghost of my past life. I was unarmed. A foolish oversight born of a desperate haste. The lead figure spoke, his voice a low, gravelly growl. I shouldn't have talked to him, little rat. He turned his impassive gaze on me. And I, detective, some things never change. My blood began to hum, a low, insistent thrum. Not fear, not exactly. A primal alertness, a coiled readiness. "Who are I people?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the sudden emptiness in my gut. The man gave a humorless chuckle. "We're the ones who clean up messes, and I am a rather large one." He gestured to the informant. He was a loose end, and I ran an inconvenience. The informant, seeing his chance, scrambled to his feet. "Run, Cole, go to the airstrip," he shrieked, a desperate plea, but the hulking figure was faster. He moved with surprising speed, a blur of motion, and a sickening thud echoed in the cavernous space. The informant crumpled to the ground, a still heap of rags. My breath hitched. The detective in me, buried but not dead, screamed at the injustice, the brutal finality of it all. The leader of the group took a step towards me, his eyes glinting in the weak spill of my flashlight. Now about I, detective. Thorn has a particular aversion to loose ends, and I am dangling by a thread. I backed away, my mind racing. The private airstrip, the Serpent, Thorn, I had to get there. But these men, they were a wall, solid and unyielding, between me and that last chance. I was disarmed, outnumbered, and facing the very kind of violence I had sworn to prevent. My investigation had led me here, to this confrontation, this brutal setback. The Serpent's game was far more dangerous, far more personal than I had ever imagined. And I was no longer just chasing a killer. I was running for my life. The gravel crunched under my boots, a sound amplified in the suffocating quiet. The figures blocking the hangar door were shadows given form, their silhouettes stark against the faint spill of light from the open doorway behind them. My breath hitched. They'd been waiting. My informant hadn't just been a rat, he'd been bait. And I, the fool, had taken the cheese. A low rumble vibrated through the soles of my feet. An engine, not just any engine, but the deep, guttural thrum of a heavy-duty turbine. My eyes scanned the periphery, straining to pierce the inky blackness. Beyond the main hangar, a smaller structure, barely more than a shed, pulsed with a single, blinding white light. And there it was. A sleek, dark shape, its engines already alive, a primal roar held barely in check. A private airstrip, no lights, engine running. This was it. This was where the Serpent took flight. Going somewhere, Cole. The voice was a silken rasp, cutting through the night air like a honed blade. It came from the figure in the center, the one who seemed to command the others with a mere tilt of his head. He stepped forward and the faint light caught the glint of metal at his wrist. A cufflink, shaped like a coiled viper. The Serpent. My informant had been right about that, at least. I didn't answer. My gaze flickered past him towards the open hangar. Inside, I could see the telltale gleam of polished steel. Not weapons, though, tools. Precision instruments laid out on a workbench like surgical implements. And beside them, schematics. Not of buildings, but of circuits, wires, intricate patterns, and symbols I didn't recognize. My mind, sluggish from the adrenaline, tried to grasp the fragments. This wasn't about brute force. It was about finesse, about delicate manipulation. He thought he could play us. The Serpent continued, his voice laced with amusement. Thought he could sell us information, then run to you. A classic mistake. Loyalty is a rare commodity, detective, and a foolish one. Loyalty. Words snagged on something deep inside me. I'd been loyal to a ghost, to a case that had consumed me, to a killer who'd slipped through my fingers. This man, this Serpent, he was a phantom from my past, too. The heists, the precision, the calculated audacity. It all pointed back to him, but there was something else, a nagging dissonance. The Serpent was a thief, a planner, a man who dealt in illicit goods. He wasn't a killer, not like the one I'd hunted. You think I'm the one who's been cleaning up loose ends? I finally managed, my voice rough. The Serpent chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. Loose ends, my dear Cole, we are merely facilitating a transition. A change of ownership, if you will. The merchandise is sensitive. It requires careful handling. Merchandise. The word felt wrong, tainted. I remembered the informant's trembling hands, the fear etched onto his face. He hadn't been afraid of being robbed. He'd been terrified of what he was carrying. My eyes drifted back to the schematics inside the hangar. One particular diagram caught my attention. It depicted a complex network, a series of interlocking gears and wires, and at its heart, a single, pulsing node. It looked eerily familiar. I'd seen something like it before, scrawled on a notepad in the killer's abandoned workshop. A signature, a cryptic symbol. The Serpent noticed my focus. Intriguing, isn't it? The architecture of control. How easily it can be dismantled or repurposed. Repurposed. The word sent a shiver down my spine. The Serpent was here for the merchandise, yes, but what was that merchandise? I forced myself to look at the Serpent to truly see him. He was a businessman, a broker of the underworld, but the violence, the sheer brutality of the killings, that wasn't his style. Not unless he was the one pulling the strings, not the one swinging the hammer. Then it hit me. The Serpent wasn't the killer, he was the buyer. And the killer was the one who had been selling. Selling not just information, but the very means to enact a larger plan. A plan that involved more than just stolen goods. My gaze snapped to the private airstrip. No lights, engine running. The plane wasn't for escape. It was for delivery. A final, desperate act of betrayal by my informant who had been playing both sides. He'd sold the Serpent something precious, something dangerous, and then, realizing the depth of his mistake, had tried to warn me. The schematics, the pulsing node, the killer's signature. They weren't just random scribbles, they were a blueprint for something that could disrupt, control, even destroy. And the Serpent, in his greed, was about to become an unwitting accomplice to something far more sinister than he knew. My mind raced, piecing together the disparate threads, the meticulous heists, designed to acquire specific components, and the Serpent, a convenient pawn, drawn in by the promise of a lucrative deal. The killer wasn't just a killer, he was a strategist, a puppet master, and I had been so focused on the Serpent, so blinded by the obvious connection, that I'd missed the true architect of this chaos. I knew who was behind it all. The Serpent was about to fly, but he wouldn't be carrying stolen jewels. He'd be carrying the very means of our undoing. And the man who had orchestrated it all, the phantom from my past, was about to vanish once more, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake. The air at the private airstrip, no lights, engine running, tasted like kerosene and regret. A single, guttural roar from the waiting plane vibrated through the soles of my worn boots. The Serpent. He was real, and he was about to vanish into the Inkai sky, taking his secrets with him. My gut twisted. I'd seen the Serpents work up close, smelled the metallic tang of fear on the darks, felt the chill of absence where a man used to stand. Now I was here, a ghost haunting the edges of a world I'd sworn to leave behind. The crates, stacked like dark teeth in the weak spill of the plane's interior light, were the prize. But what was inside? Repurposed for what? And by whom? The Serpent wasn't just a thief. He was a phantom, leaving behind a trail of expertly executed crimes that bled into the nightmare I'd carried for years. It was a cruel echo, a taunt from the past. It felt alien, a relic of a life I'd shed like a snakeskin. But the Serpent, this phantom of my past, had dragged me back. He was a ghost made flesh, and I was his unwilling hunter. A flicker of movement at the edge of the runway, not the Serpent. The figure moved with a fluid grace that spoke of training, of purpose. They weren't part of the Serpent's crew, I would have sensed it. This was an intruder, a rival, or perhaps something more. The plane's engine coughed, restless beast impatient to fly. The Serpent was close. I could feel it, a prickling awareness that crawled across my skin. This was my chance, not to steal, but to inspect. My mind raced. Why would anyone else be here at this precise moment at this desolate airstrip? The Darkworker's murder, the missing merchandise, the Serpent's impassable precision, it all felt like threads leading to a single, terrifying knot. And now this unknown player had entered the game. I stayed low, using the sparse cover of an overturned fuel drum. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and anticipation. The cloaked figure reached the crates, their gloved hands tracing the rough wood. They were careful, deliberate, no wasted motion, a professional. Then, a sound that stopped my breath, a soft, metallic click. The figure produced a small, intricate device, no larger than my palm. It hummed with a low, almost inaudible frequency. They pressed it against one of the crates. A faint green light pulsed from the device, then extinguished. What had they done? What had they scanned? My pulse thrummed, a discordant rhythm against the engine's drone. This wasn't just about the Serpent anymore. There were layers to this, a conspiracy far deeper than I'd imagined. The Serpent was the visible threat, the storm I could see gathering. But this other figure, they were the unseen currents, the treacherous undertow. I waited, listening to the receding footsteps, the fading hum of the device. The Serpent's men, oblivious, were busy loading the last of the crates. The plane's engines roared to life, a deafening crescendo that drowned out all other sound. A ramp lowered and the Serpent himself emerged, a silhouette against the blinding interior light. Did he see the other figure? Did he know about the intrusion? The Serpent stepped onto the ramp, and then he was gone, swallowed by the belly of the beast. It climbed, a diminishing point of light, and then it was gone. I pushed myself away from the fuel drum, my legs stiff. The Serpent had escaped. But the encounter with the cloaked figure had changed everything. They had been interested in the merchandise, just like the Serpent, but their methods, their technology. It was alien to this underworld. The cloaked figure had been meticulous. They had scanned the crates. What if they weren't just scanning the merchandise? What if they were scanning for something else? Something personal. My mind flashed to a worn photograph, tucked away in a locked drawer back in my apartment. A woman's smile, bright and full of life. A life I had failed to protect. The Serpent's methods. The cloaked figure's advanced technology. What if the Serpent wasn't the only one who knew about the merchandise? A connection that ran deeper than I dared to imagine. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, hummed a low, insistent threat. Kerosene, sharp and metallic, scraped the back of my throat. The drone of the idling engine was a physical thing, a vibration that traveled from the cracked tarmac up through my soles and settled in my bones. He was here, the Serpent, or at least the man who wore his skin. My breath hitched, a small, ragged sound swallowed by the night. The roar of the engine was a beast impatient to be unleashed, its breath a hot wind against my face. I'd followed whispers, fragments of hushed conversations, the faint scent of fear that clung to the edges of this forgotten patch of earth. This was it. The culmination of weeks spent wading through the muck and mire of the city's underbelly. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness near the hangar. Tall, unnervingly still, it moved with a predatory grace that sent a familiar tremor through me, more like the coiled tension of a spring about to snap. I'd seen that stillness before, in the glint of eyes that held no remorse, only calculation. The figure approached the plane, a silhouette against the faint glow of the runway lights. It felt like an extension of myself, a grim promise. He paused at the foot of the boarding stairs, turning his head as if sensing a disturbance. The wind, a fickle accomplice, played with his coat, making the fabric ripple like dark water. I imagined his face, sharp and knowing, the kind of face that could dissect a room with a single glance. This was the moment. The trap, painstakingly set, was sprung, not with nets or cages, but with a bait he couldn't resist, the echo of his past. I'd leaked information, a carefully crafted breadcrumb trail leading to this very place, this very time. The bait was the promise of escape, of a clean slate, of a final audacious act. But the real prize, the one I craved, was him. He ascended the stairs, his movements economical, precise. Each step a testament to a life lived on the edge of chaos. I waited, counting the seconds, the rumble of the engine a counterpoint to the frantic rhythm of my own pulse. Then, a flicker of movement from the far side of the hangar, not the figure from the plane. This was different, smaller, quicker. My head snapped towards the sound. My gut clenched, a warning siren blaring in the quiet. "You," a voice rasped, rough as sandpaper. It wasn't the Serpent. It was a man I'd seen before, a snitch, a rat who'd sold me information for a handful of crumpled bills and a promise of protection. He was supposed to be miles away, nursing a bottle and his bad decisions. His eyes, wide and frantic, darted between me and the plane. "Cole, what are you doing here?" he stammered, backing away. "The same thing you are, apparently," I said, my voice low and steady, masking the sudden surge of unease. The Serpent was still in the plane, oblivious, or was he? "This ain't my night," the snitch mumbled, turning to flee. "Hold on," I commanded. My hand shot out, grasping his arm. His skin was clammy, slick with sweat. He flinched. There's someone else, watching." My grip tightened. "Who?" "I don't know, saw them. By the old fuel depot. Just a shape, but they're not." This wasn't part of the plan. The Serpent was a creature of solitude, a phantom who operated alone. The plane's engine sputtered, then roared to life with renewed vigor. A blast of hot air washed over us. The snitch whimpered. "Go," I said, releasing him. "Get out of here now." He didn't need telling twice. I watched him go, my mind racing. The Serpent was about to take flight, but who was the watcher, and what did they want? My carefully constructed trap felt suddenly fragile, riddled with unseen holes. There was either hunter or the hunted. The kerosene scent seemed to thicken, suffocating me with doubt. The Serpent was almost mine, but a new, unsettling question clawed at me. Was this a trap, or had I walked into one myself? The engine noise was a deafening roar now, a prelude to escape. I had to make a choice. Now. The roar of the idling engine vibrated through the soles of my worn boots, a low growl against the absolute silence of the night. The private airstrip, no lights, engine running, was a black void under a sky choked with stars. Each pinprick of light felt like an accusation, a silent witness to the mess I'd made. The air was sharp with the scent of aviation fuel and something else. Something metallic, coppery, that pricked at the edges of my memory. He'd said the Serpent was taking flight. That meant this lonely stretch of asphalt, this wading machine, and the Watcher was here. Years of dust and regret had settled on me, a thick, suffocating blanket, but tonight it felt like it was beginning to fray. The echo of the past was a constant companion, a phantom limb that throbbed with every wrong turn. But this time, I wouldn't let it cripple me. The silhouette resolved itself slowly, a figure emerging from the deeper blackness beyond the tarmac. Tall, lean, moving with an unnerving grace. Not the frantic scramble of the informant from earlier, but something measured, controlled. "I came," a voice rasped, low and gravelly, cutting through the engine's thrum. It was a voice I knew, a voice that had haunted my nightmares, a voice I'd buried deep in the earth of my own despair. The stranger stepped into the faint spill of light from the aircraft's cockpit. It wasn't the face I expected, not the twisted visage of the killer I'd chased. It was familiar, too familiar. A face I'd seen in cracked mirrors, in the weary lines of my own reflection after too many sleepless nights. "Who are I?" I demanded, my voice rough. The figure chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "Who do I think, Cole? After all this time, I still don't recognize myself." My mind reeled. It was a trick, a clever, cruel illusion designed to break me. It all clicked into a horrifying, undeniable pattern. The informant hadn't been the Serpent. He'd been a pawn, a distraction. The real Serpent was me. The informant's panicked flight, his cryptic warnings, it was all part of the setup. He'd been sent to lure me here, to this very spot, to this very moment. Insane or inevitable. The figure countered, taking another step closer. The guilt, the failure, the emptiness. But it always finds a way back, Cole. It always finds a way to take flight. I saw it then, the glint of metal in the stranger's hand. A knife. Not a crude weapon, but something sharp, surgical, like the ones used in the original crimes. The part of I that couldn't let go. The engine coughed, a deep, guttural sound, and the propeller began to spin, a blurred disk of impending departure. The Serpent was indeed taking flight, but it wasn't a person. It was an idea, and it was embodied by this phantom. My hands were steady, a testament to years of training, but my mind was a battlefield. Was this a hallucination? A final descent into madness, or was this the truth laid bare in the desolate expanse of this forgotten airstrip? "It ends tonight," I declared, the words a desperate prayer. The figure laughed again, a sound like breaking glass. "Does it, Cole, or does it just begin anew?" They lunged, not with brute force, but with a fluid, predatory grace that mirrored my own movements from years ago. I sidestepped, the muzzle of my gun tracking their impassably fast trajectory. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the ghosts of victims and the specter of my own inadequacy. My first shot went wide, a frustrated bark against the night. The figure was too quick, too elusive. My every instinct screamed that this was impossible, that this was a dream. But the sting of a glancing blow across my arm, the sharp intake of breath as I stumbled back, this was brutally, undeniably real. The metallic scent was stronger now, mingling with the acrid smell of cordite. I saw the wound on my arm, a thin red line blooming against my sleeve. It was the Serpent's touch, my own touch. I always were too slow. The figure taunted, circling me, their movements a macabre ballet. Too hesitant, too afraid to truly finish the job. Fear was a familiar enemy, but this was different. This was self-loathing given form, a manifestation of every doubt I'd ever harbored. I had to fight it. I feinted left, drawing their attention, then spun hard to the right, my pistol aimed steady. The engine's roar was deafening now, a primal scream against the vast indifference of the night. The propeller blurred into an indistinguishable vortex. This was the precipice, the edge of oblivion, and I was standing on it, locked in a desperate, violent waltz with the ghost of my own failure. The echo of my own breath was a ragged thing in the sudden, vast quiet, or what was left of it, lay sprawled on the grimy concrete, a grotesque punctuation mark to a sentence I'd been writing for years. My muscles screamed, a dull ache that was almost a comfort. I knelt, the rough surface biting into my worn trousers, and looked at the face. It was a mask of surprise, frozen in a rictus that held no recognition, no triumph, just nothing. The air tasted of ozone and something metallic, the phantom scent of the rain that had begun to fall in a soft, insistent murmur. Each drop felt like a tiny accusation, washing away the grime but not the stain. I reached out, my fingers hovering inches above the cold skin. There was no flicker of life, no last desperate plea. Just the stillness that follows the storm. My gaze drifted to the discarded item at the figure's side. Not a weapon, not a tool of their craft. A small, tarnished silver locket. I recognized it. It belonged to the victim from the old case, the one that had fractured my career, the one that had followed me into every shadow. My hand trembled as I picked it up. Inside, 2 faded photographs. A young woman, her smile bright and hopeful, and a man, his face etched with a familiar weariness. A low rumble, growing steadily louder, sliced through the night. Headlights, 2 sharp beams cutting through the gloom, approached the warehouse doors. The detective and their team, they were here. I'd called them, my voice a stranger's rasp on the comms, reporting my findings. Now the cleanup, the official narrative. I stood, the locket a secret weight in my palm. The figure on the floor was a symptom, not the disease. The disease had been a gnawing emptiness, a desperate need for control, for retribution. It had worn so many faces. The architect of these recent heists, the phantom who had mirrored my own failed investigation, was not the one I had just subdued. That was a pawn, a puppet, a desperate soul manipulated by a far more cunning hand. The warehouse doors groaned open, revealing the harsh glare of the approaching vehicles. Figures emerged, silhouetted against the lights, their movements efficient, practiced. The detective's voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the air. "Cole, what's the situation?" I didn't turn, they're still out there. A sigh heavy with weariness escaped the detective. "Cole, we found the evidence, the plans, the money. It all points to this individual. They were the one orchestrating everything." I finally turned, meeting their gaze. They were a distraction, a scapegoat. "Look at the locket, detective." I held it out. This belonged to the first victim. Why would the architect possess this, unless they weren't just copying the past, but were intimately connected to it? The detective took the locket, their brow furrowed in concentration. They opened it, their gaze scanning the faded images. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, crossed their face. This is impossible. This victim died 15 years ago. "Exactly," I said, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. The desperation, the meticulous planning, the cruel irony of mirroring my own downfall. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about a twisted form of justice, a grand, elaborate act of vengeance against the system, against me, against anyone who had failed to see the truth. My steps were heavy as I moved towards the exit, leaving the organized chaos of the investigation behind me. The rain had intensified, slicking the tarmac of the deserted industrial lot. My car sat where I'd left it, a silent sentinel. As I opened the door, my eyes caught a glint of light in the distance. It was a flicker, almost imperceptible from the edge of the property. A small private airstrip, usually dormant, now alive with the faint hum of an engine. The lights were off, the engine running. A getaway, not a car, but a plane. The architect wasn't just a planner, they were a survivor, and they were still very much in play. I looked back at the warehouse, at the flashing blue and red lights of the arriving reinforcements. They would secure the scene, collect the evidence, build their case, but they would never understand the depth of the rot. I got into my car, the worn leather cool against my skin. The engine turned over, a familiar growl. It was a final taunt, a clear message. I had solved the puzzle, pieced together the fractured fragments of the past and the present, but the ultimate truth was still a ghost, slipping through my fingers. The case was resolved in a way, but my own personal war was far from over. The chase, it seemed, had only just begun.